Montana, July. The kind of heat that doesn't announce itself, it just presses down. Slow and quiet, until everything underneath it starts to break. Cole Harlan crested the low ridge and saw it all at once, 3 spread wide. Moving low and patient the way animals move when they've already decided how this ends. And at the center of that circle, a child. Feet planted, both hands gripping a broken branch above her head, screaming at the nearest one with more fury than should have been possible from a body that small. Behind her, a woman on the ground, not moving. Cole drew his gun and fired 3 shots into the sky. The coyotes scattered like smoke. He was already off the horse before it stopped moving. The girl spun around and leveled that branch straight at his chest. "Don't come any closer." Her voice was wrecked from thirst. It did not shake. Her eyes not afraid, just watching, measuring every inch of him. Cole stopped. He looked at the branch aimed at his chest. Then he looked at her face. And he did something he hadn't planned. He sat down on the ground, right there, cross-legged in the dirt so his eyes were level with hers. "How long have you been out here?" 2 days. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 2 days, alone. Nothing but a broken stick between her and everything trying to get past her. And then this lone cowboy made one call 10 words down a telegraph wire that none of them knew would change everything. This is that story. Stay with it. Because what happens next is the part worth hearing. July in Montana is a particular kind of brutal. Not the loud kind, not thunder or wind. The quiet kind, like a pan left too long on low heat. Everything just sits there and gets hotter, and there is nothing to do about it but endure. Cole Harlan rode east that afternoon to check fencing he had let go for 3 weeks. Not because he was lazy. He wasn't. He was up before light most days and in bed after dark most nights, and there was always something to do on a ranch that runs on one pair of hands. But 3 weeks ago he had stood at that far east fence and asked himself a question he had no good answer to. Is it worth fixing for one man? One shrinking herd, a house with 4 rooms and 1 heartbeat in it. He hadn't fixed the fence. He was fixing it now. The land around him was flat in every direction. The horizon just a pencil line against an enormous sky. Cole had ridden this ground for 8 years. He knew every foot of it. He had stopped finding comfort in that somewhere around year 4 and hadn't found anything to put in its place. He heard the sound before he saw anything. It came from the northwest, high and sharp and furious. Not a cry for help, not fear. Something closer to an attack. The sound of something defending itself with everything it had left. Cole didn't think about it. He drove his heels in and rode toward it. He came over a low ridge and saw everything at once. 3 coyotes spread out in a loose circle on the flat ground below, moving patient and low, the way animals move when they've already decided how this ends. And at the center of that circle, a child, feet planted wide, both hands gripping a broken branch above her head, screaming at the nearest one with more volume than should have been possible from a body that small. Behind her, a woman on the ground, not moving. Cole drew his gun and fired 3 shots into the sky, not at the coyotes. Up. The sound scattered them like smoke, and he was already pushing the horse down the slope, already off before it stopped moving. The child spun around and leveled the branch at him. "Don't come any closer." Her voice was wrecked from thirst. It did not shake. Cole stopped. He raised both hands. He looked at the branch, aimed at his chest, and then he looked at her face, and he did something he hadn't planned. He sat down on the ground. Not kneeled, sat, cross-legged, right there in the dirt, so his eyes were at the same level as hers. He had spent enough years around horses to know that height reads as threat. This wasn't strategy, it was just the thing that felt right. "My name is Cole Harlan," he said. "I have a ranch about 4 miles north of here. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't move the branch. "4 men came," she said. "They shot Papa. They hurt Mama. They took everything and left." He looked past her at the woman on the ground. He watched until he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. 2 days. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 2 days. This child had stood between wild animals and her unconscious mother for 2 full days in Montana July heat, with nothing but a broken stick. He opened his eyes. "What is your name?" Not a question this time. Something flatter. more certain. The child looked at him. She was doing arithmetic. He could see it in her face, adding things up. 3 minutes, she said, then I decide. He nodded. 3 minutes. He went to the woman. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Pulse weak but there. Head wound. Dried dark, wrist swollen. He checked her over fast, careful with his hands, not going further than he needed to. He heard the child step closer behind him. Not touching, watching every move his hands made, he unslung his canteen, held it out toward the child without looking up. Mama first, she said. Your mama can't swallow right now. She'll get water when I get her stable. He turned and met the child's eyes. You drink now, or you won't be any use to her. She looked at him for a moment. Then she took the canteen. She drank 3 swallows and stopped, even though she clearly needed more. She stopped because she didn't know how far they were going. He registered that, filed it. This child is more reliable than most adults I know. He handed it back and turned to lift the woman onto the horse. The broken branch was lying in the dirt where the child had dropped it. He picked it up. He didn't think much about why. He just looked at it a moment, at the 2 smooth places where small hands had gripped it, and then he tied it to the saddle. The child watched him do this. She didn't say anything, but he saw her notice. She climbed up behind him. Both fists locked into the back of his coat, not because she was afraid of falling, because she needed to be no farther from her mother than this. They rode north. Half a mile out, the child went to sleep. Not slowly, she just dropped, her forehead against his shoulder. 48 hours of refusal, finally giving way at once. Cole slowed the horse. He held both of them. And somewhere in those 4 miles, with the sun going long and gold across the flat land, and the weight of a sleeping child against his back, Cole Harlan felt something he had not felt in 8 years. Like the house ahead of him might be worth arriving at. The Harlan Ranch sat about a mile back from the main road, down a dirt track that needed grading. Cole had been meaning to grade it for 2 years. The house needed paint. The barn was missing a board on the east side. The kitchen garden was gone to seed. What used to be neat rows now just dry stalks and thistle. It was not the property of a man who had given up. It was the property of a man who had forgotten what he would be giving up for. The land was good. The well had never run dry. The fencing was mostly sound. These were the things a man maintains when he has stopped maintaining himself. Half a mile from his own gate, Cole came across Ruth Alderman on her gray mare, working the shared fence line the way she did most Thursdays. She was 58 years old and built solid, with the kind of face that had spent enough years in Montana weather to stop worrying about it. She pulled up when she saw him, looked at the woman across his saddle, looked at the child asleep against his back. She didn't ask a lot of questions. You need help. If you're free, Cole said. I'm never free. She was already turning her horse around. That's not what I asked. She rode with him to the gate. She helped him carry May inside without being told how. She settled into his kitchen the way she always settled into other people's spaces, like she'd been there before, and she put water on the stove and looked through the pantry and made the quiet assessment of someone who already knows what needs doing. Go where you need to go, she told Cole. I'll be here when you get back. Cole went. Inside, Lily had woken the moment the horse stopped, dropped off the back before Cole could reach for her, both feet hitting the dirt at the same time. She followed them through the front door without being asked, but she wasn't following exactly. She was moving through the rooms with her eyes, going to the windows first, then the doors, then the corners. She was 6 years old. She was doing a security check. Cole watched this and did not say anything about it. Does that door lock? Lily asked. She was looking at the front door. It does, Cole said. He turned the key in the lock. Then he took it out and held it toward her. Lily looked at it. She didn't take it right away. She looked at it sitting in his palm for a long moment, like she was trying to understand what the offer meant. Then she took it. She held it and looked at it a while longer. Then she went to the chair beside May's bed and sat down and didn't leave. Ruth was standing in the doorway. She watched Cole put the key in the child's hand, and she nodded once. Very small, the nod of someone who recognizes when something is being done right. Neither of them said anything about it before he rode out. Cole untied the branch from his saddle. He carried it inside. He stood a moment in the doorway of May's room, looking at where Lily sat in that chair. Then he set the branch against the wall beside the door, close enough for her to reach it from the chair without getting up, far enough from the doorway that it wasn't in anyone's way. He did not explain this. He did not point it out. He just did it. Then he left. He rode south to Clearwater. It was 40 minutes at a decent pace. He kept a decent pace. The telegraph office sat above the feed store, run by a man named Earl, who had been there 12 years and understood that people who came in with a certain look on their face were not there for conversation. Earl slid a form across the counter. Cole wrote for a moment. Crossed some out. He was not a man who used more words than he needed. What he sent was 10 words. Rider gang, 1 dead woman critical. Child alone 2 days. Come, Harlan. The man receiving that wire was R.J. Tate, deputy federal marshal out of Billings. Cole had known him for 12 years, going back to the night they had both spent in a Clearwater jail cell for what the arresting deputy called public disorder. What it had actually been was this. Cole had been riding back from a supply run when he came across a group of railroad workers surrounding a Chinese laborer at the edge of a construction site. The man's name was Henry Lee. He had been working that site for 6 months, knew the work better than most of the men standing over him, and a group of them had decided they didn't want to work alongside him and were making that position clear in the most physical way available. R.J. Tate then, 22 and working as a day laborer himself, had stepped in first. Cole had stopped because stopping was the only thing that made sense to him. They spent the night in a cell together. In the morning, before they let them go, Tate had looked at Cole and said something Cole had never forgotten. I don't know who you are, but if I owe anybody anything in this life, it's you. Cole had never called in that debt. He was calling it now. He paid Earl and rode back north. Ruth was still there. She had made soup from what was in the pantry and put Lily to bed in the chair with a blanket, and she was sitting at Cole's table with a cup of coffee. She did not ask where he had been. She hasn't moved, Ruth said. She won't, Cole said. Ruth finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, said she would be back in the morning, and rode home in the dark. Cole sat at the kitchen table alone. He didn't eat. He wasn't hungry. He thought about Clara, not the way he usually did. He usually thought about her the way you press a bruised, familiar ache, something concrete to feel. Tonight, it was different, quieter, like just a fact he was turning over in his hands. Clara had died 8 years ago. 26 years old, the baby had gone with her. A boy they had named James in the few hours they'd had before the ground took him. Cole had carried that name in a box in his chest ever since, not thinking about it often, just knowing it was in there. He had not entered the spare room for nearly a year after, when he finally went in to clear her things. He found a journal in the bottom drawer of the dresser. She had written her name inside the cover, and nothing else, not a single word past the first page. He had closed it, and put it back and closed the drawer. He sat at the table now and listened. From down the hall came 2 sounds. Lily's breathing, light and even in the chair. May's breathing, heavier and slower in the bed. Both steady, both there. Cole had not had another heartbeat in this house in 8 years. He sat with that for a while. When Lily woke in the morning, she was already at the kitchen table by the time he came in, working through the bowl of beans he had left on the stove. She ate with complete focus. She didn't look up right away. Then she did. Do you know who those men were? She asked. Cole poured himself coffee, sat down on the upturned crate he used as a second chair. I have one lead. Are you going to find them? I called someone who will. Lily was quiet for a moment. Cole was learning that her quiet meant she was actually thinking it through. Why didn't you go yourself? Because I have 2 people here who matter more than being the one who goes. She looked at him. The evaluating look shifted just a degree. Her eyes stopped grating and started just looking. She looked back at her bowl. Your cornbread yesterday needed more salt, she said. I'll fix it. See that you do, Lily said. Lily had been keeping a list in her head since the ridge. She kept it organized the way her father had taught her to organize things, which was what you know. what you don't know, and what you still need to find out. Papa always said the trouble with most people was they put things in the wrong column. What she knew about Cole Harlan so far, he had fired into the air, not at the coyotes. He had sat down on the ground when he could have stood. He had given her the water and explained why, instead of just handing it over. He had given her the key to the door. He had not said everything was going to be okay. He had not said anything bad about Papa. He had brought the branch inside and put it where she could reach it from the chair. What he had not done, he had not tried to hug her. He had not told her not to worry. He had not explained why she should trust him. People who had to explain why you should trust them usually gave you reasons to wonder. What she still needed to find out, whether he was actually a good man. She would need more information before she could close that question. She was 6 years old. She was aware this was a lot of thinking for 6. She had decided she didn't care about that. The second night she woke from something and wasn't sure what. She was upright in the chair before she was fully awake. The room was dark. Mama was breathing. She could hear that right away. That was always the first check. Then she realized she had said something out loud. Something small, just Papa's name. She sat very still. The doorway was dark, but there was a shape in it. Cole, sitting on the floor just outside, his back against the wall. Not in the room, just there. Near. He didn't say anything. He didn't come in. He didn't try to fix anything. He just stayed. Lily watched the shape of him in the dark for a while. Then she put her head back on the armrest. In the morning, she did not say anything about it. But when she sat down at breakfast, she took the chair 6 inches closer to his end of the table than she had the morning before. She didn't think about it consciously. She just did it. Neither of them mentioned it. May opened her eyes on the third morning. She came back fast. 1 second she wasn't there, and the next she was. Eyes open and fully present, like someone who had trained herself against lying still too long. She did 3 things in about 4 seconds. Checked for Lily. Read the room, located the exits. Lily was in the chair, Mama. One word. Lily's throat wouldn't give her more than that. May looked at her daughter the way she must have been waiting to look at her. The kind of looking that goes all the way through. She took in the hollows under the girl's eyes, the cracked lips, the straight-backed posture of someone who had decided she would not fall apart and had held to that decision past the point where it should have been possible. May's face went very still and very careful, like a hand holding a door closed. "Are you hurt?" May asked. "No, did you eat?" "He cooks beans and cornbread. It needed more salt." May closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. When she opened them, Cole was standing in the doorway with a tray. She looked at him the way she looked at everything that needed to be understood, starting from his eyes, then his hands, then the set of his shoulders, the wear in his clothes, the particular way he held himself in someone else's space. "Where are we?" she asked. "My ranch. Cole Harlan, north of Clearwater, Montana." "How long?" "Third morning. Thomas, just the name." She already knew the answer. She was asking to have it on the record. "Your daughter told me the first day." May nodded. She looked at her left wrist, wrapped in clean cloth, the knot at the top where she could work it herself if she needed to. "Who did this?" "I did." "Do you know anything about medicine?" "I've lived 30 miles from the nearest doctor for 8 years, Cole said. "I know enough to do what needs doing." She turned her wrist over slowly. "Clean work," she said. Not a compliment, just an accurate observation. He set the tray down on the bedside table without making a moment out of it. "Do you want to know your condition?" he asked. "Or would you rather I step out first?" May looked at him. Most men didn't ask. They told you, or they decided for you and told you later. "Tell me," she said. "I need the information to plan," he told her straight. Head wound that needed a real doctor's eye and time. Wrist possibly broken. Ribs bruised on the right side. 1 week of actual rest before she could travel without risking real damage to herself. May listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, 1 week, like signing a contract. By mid-morning, they were all 3 at the kitchen table. Cole had found a second chair somewhere and brought the upturned crate back out. The cornbread had more salt in it. Lily tried a piece, considered it carefully, and nodded. "Better," she said. I heard you the first time, Cole said. May watched this exchange. She watched how Cole looked at Lily when the girl spoke. Not the look of someone who wanted to be liked, but the look of someone who was actually paying attention to what was in front of him. She asked about Thomas. Cole told her what Delray had found and sent word about. He said it plainly, and without softening any of it. May received it with both hands flat on the table. Lily put her hand on her mother's. She didn't say anything wise or comforting. She didn't try to fix it. She just put her hand there and said, "Mama," one word, but it held everything that needed holding. When Lily went outside to look at the horse through the fence, May turned to Cole. "What do you want?" she asked. "I'm sorry. 8 years alone. You find two strangers on an open road and bring them home. You clean the wounds and feed us and send for the law. I'm asking what you want in return." Cole looked at her for a moment. "Nothing," he said. "Nobody does all of this for nothing. Would you like me to make something up? So the answer sounds more reasonable." May said nothing. "I found a 6-year-old standing between wild animals and her unconscious mother with a broken stick," Cole said. "I couldn't ride past that. That is the whole of my explanation." She looked at him for a while longer. Then she said, "All right, it was not trust. Not yet. But it was the place where trust might start if the information kept adding up right." That afternoon, Cole was at the window when he saw Hank Delray coming up the track. The sheriff rode the slow pace of a man carrying something he would rather not be carrying. Cole went out to meet him at the gate. "She's awake," Cole said. "Good." Delray looked past him toward the house. "I found Thomas Calloway. He's been seen to. Best we could do." He paused. "And I've had reports from 2 other homesteads inside 50 miles. Same tracks, same pattern, same timing rider," Cole said. But Cole, this wasn't random road work. They knew the Calloway family was on that specific stretch on that specific day. Somebody told them. The 2 men stood at the gate, looking at each other. "I already wired Tate," Cole said. Delray nodded slowly. "Good, because this one is bigger than I can work alone." On the morning of the 5th day, Lily appeared at the barn door, both hands behind her back, head slightly tilted, looking at Red the roan with the focused expression of someone assessing a situation they haven't decided about yet. Cole was at the back of the barn doing work that needed doing. He didn't say anything. He just let her stand there. Red lowered his big head after a while, slow and easy, turning toward the child with a horse's unhurried curiosity. Lily didn't move toward him. She stayed right where she was, and they looked at each other for a long time. About 20 minutes in, without turning away from the horse, she said, "Does he bite?" "He never has," Cole said. "But he could. Any horse could. In theory." Lily considered this. "I appreciate the honesty," she said. She took one step forward, stopped, took another. 30 minutes after that, she was standing close enough to put her hand on Red's nose, her palm flat against his muzzle. She spoke to him in the careful, serious tone of someone delivering important news. "Your name is Red, but that isn't right for you. You look like a penny, like an old coin, the kind that's been around long enough to be trusted." Red blinked at her. "I'm going to call you Penny," she said, "unless you have objections." Cole set down what he was holding. He stood in the corner of the barn and felt something in his chest go a little lighter. Not much, just one catch of something that had been locked for a while, releasing. He didn't say anything about it. He picked his tool back up and kept working. On the 6th day, Cole was showing Lily how to hold a water bucket near the horse without spooking him. It required patience and a quiet voice and a willingness to stay still longer than you thought you needed to. Lily had all 3. He heard May at the barn door before he saw her. The sound of careful footsteps on uneven ground. He glanced over. She was in the doorway, moving slow, one hand on the frame, but standing under her own power. She had made it farther than the day before. She had not asked anyone to help her get there. Cole saw her and turned back to Lily. He kept talking through the bucket lesson in the same even voice, not changing his pace, not making a moment out of May being there. When May turned to go back, Cole followed her out, not beside her, a step and a half behind, far enough that she didn't feel tended to, close enough that if her legs went, he could catch her. She didn't need catching, but she noted the distance he had chosen. She filed it without naming it. On the 8th day, May made it to the front porch on her own. She stood there looking out at the flat land and the enormous sky, and Cole watched from the barn and let her stand. He brought a chair out later, set it down beside her, went back inside without a word. May sat without thanking him. Cole understood this was not rudeness. She was treating him like someone level with her, not someone who had done her a favor. There was a difference, and he recognized it. They sat in the quiet for a while. Montana afternoons can stretch out long and open, and this one did. 8 years alone, May said finally. What was the reason for that? Not small talk. She was asking because she needed to understand who she was living with. Cole told her about Clara, not in order, in pieces. The way you offer something fragile to someone whose hands you're not yet certain of. The way she had died, the boy who went with her, named James in those 3 hours before the ground took him. The journal in the bottom drawer, with nothing past the first page. May listened without filling the spaces. She didn't say she understood. She didn't say it got easier. She just listened until he was done. Then she said, Thomas used to say, grief doesn't stop. It changes shape, like fire that burns down to ash. Which kind are you carrying? Cole looked at the flat land for a moment. I'm honestly not sure anymore, he said. Not since this week. May nodded. She looked at the horizon a while longer and then went back inside. On the 10th day, Delray came out again. He had a letter with him, found in what remained of Thomas Calloway's saddlebag. Water damage, but legible. Originally sent to an address in Ohio. Forwarded to Montana. It had arrived after they had already left. It was from a man named Bernard Ashworth, attorney, Boston, on behalf of a woman named Augusta Hargrove. The language was formal and without warmth. The language of someone who had never said please when they could say required. Thomas was to return to Boston to discuss matters pertaining to the family estate. Augusta Hargrove wished to make arrangements regarding the child. May read it at the kitchen table. Her face went the color of old ash. She told Cole what he needed to know. She said it plainly, in the voice of someone who has thought about something so many times that all the raw feeling has been worn smooth. Thomas was Augusta Hargrove's only son. 3 generations of shipping money out of Boston. When Thomas married May, a mill worker's daughter, from Connecticut, Augusta had called it him destroying his future. They had never taken anything from the Hargroves. Thomas had refused every offer. He wanted to build something himself. But Thomas's grandfather had left a trust. Lily, as the only grandchild, was the named heir to a portion of it. Augusta controlled that trust until Lily turned 21, unless a court decided otherwise. If Augusta has guardianship, May said, she controls that money permanently. Does she know Thomas is dead? Cole asked. Word travels fast enough. I'd assume she does. Will she come? She will come, May said. No hesitation, no question in it. Augusta Hargrove does not walk away from anything she considers hers. She looked at Cole directly. With Augusta, Lily is not a grandchild. Lily is the last piece of Thomas she can still reach. And I will not let my daughter grow up with a person who looks at people and sees property. That evening, Cole worked late in the barn. Lily had developed a habit of stopping at the barn door before bed to deliver her report to Penny. Cole had come to expect it. Neither of them had discussed it. It had just become part of how the days ended. The grandmother from Boston, Lily said, not a question, just the beginning of something. Cole set down what he was holding. She wants to take me, Lily said. Who told you that? I heard you and Mama talking. Should you have been listening? I was standing in the hallway, and you were both speaking at a completely normal volume. A pause. There was some listening involved, but the real question is whether she wants to take me. Cole sat down on the hay bale. She wants to raise you, he said. That's not what I asked. He looked at the child. 6 years old, straight-backed on the hay bale, waiting for the real answer. I don't know if she loves you, Cole said. I haven't met her, but I know this. Loving someone and wanting to own them are 2 different things, and a person can do the second, while truly believing they're doing the first. Lily thought about this for a while. Is Mama scared? Your mama isn't scared of much. But losing you, yes. Will you let it happen? No. Cole was quiet for a moment. I can promise to do everything in my power to stop it. That's the promise I can keep. Promising you, the outcome is something no one has the right to do. Lily looked at him for a long time. That's a grown-up answer, she said. It's a true answer. I like true answers better. She stood up and dusted off the back of her dress. Good night, Cole. First time she had said just his name. Later that night, May found Cole in the kitchen. She had passed the branch on her way down the hall, still in its place against the wall by the spare room door. She had not moved it since she first noticed it. She had not asked about it until now. You brought that branch inside yourself. Yes, why? He thought about it a moment. Seemed like it had done its job. Seemed like it deserved to be somewhere she could see it. May looked at her coffee cup. Something in the line of her shoulders changed. Just a little, 1 degree. Like something she had been bracing against had shifted slightly out of position. She didn't say anything else about it. The telegram from Tate came the next afternoon. Cole read it standing at the gate. Received 3 rider men identified. Cal rider leaders still at large. En route. Keep them where they are. Do not let them travel alone. Tate. He folded the paper and looked up. May was on the porch. Lily was running from the barn toward her, carrying something in both hands. Something she had found and wanted her mother to see. And May's face was doing something it hadn't done since she had woken up. Something that wasn't calculation or pain. Cal Ryder was still out there somewhere. Augusta Hargrove was coming, and Cole Harlan was standing at the gate of his own ranch, looking at what was inside it. And for the first time in 8 years, the thought he had was not about what it was missing. It was about what it held. Bernard Ashworth arrived on day 13. He came up the track in a rented buggy, wearing a suit that had no business being in Montana. He was a thin man, somewhere in his 50s, with the kind of face that had spent most of its life across a desk. Careful eyes, no wasted movement. The sort of man who was never in a hurry, because he had long since learned that hurrying was for people who weren't certain of the outcome. He was carrying a leather case. Cole met him at the gate. May came out onto the porch. She had seen the buggy from the window, and she was already standing when Ashworth climbed down. He introduced himself, attorney, Boston. He represented the interests of Mrs. Augusta Hargrove. He had papers for May Calloway. He was sorry for her loss. He said it the way people say things they are required to say. He handed May the papers and waited while she read them. Cole watched Ashworth's face while May read. The lawyer looked at the house. He looked at Lily, who had appeared in the doorway behind May. He looked at the condition of the property. He didn't look at any of it like a person looks at things. He looked at it the way you look at a column of numbers to see what they add up to. After Ashworth left, Cole went to the barn. He stood in there for a minute. Penny looked at him over the stall door. Stop it, Cole told the horse. May had the papers on the kitchen table. By the time he came back in, she read through them again, once and then a second time. And then she set them down flat and looked at him. She listed Augusta's arguments. No property, no fixed address, no income, recent serious physical trauma. A widowed mother could not provide what a child required. Boston had schools, connections, stability. The frontier was no place to raise a child without means. These arguments are technically accurate, May said. They're not accurate in the way that matters. Courts look at the technical. They sat with that for a moment. What I can offer, Cole said, is a permanent address on paper. This ranch, and I can testify on your behalf. A single man testifying for a widow who is living in his house, May said. They will use that against us. He knew she was right. Then we don't give them anything to use, he said. May looked at him. She was already ahead of him in the thinking, and he could see it in her face. Marry me, Cole said. She didn't look surprised. She had been watching where the conversation was going. On paper, she said, to close the legal gap. No, now she did look surprised. Cole put both hands flat on the table. It was the gesture of a man preparing to say something that needs to be said straight. I won't ask you to do it on paper. That means lying in front of a court. And it means I've built a situation where you owe me something. I don't want that between us. Then what are you asking? A real arrangement. I give you my name and this land and the protection the law gives a married woman. And time. Time for us to figure out who we are to each other. No expiration on it, no terms hidden underneath it, no performance for a judge. May looked at him without blinking. You've known me 13 days. I know that. This is insane. Probably. You don't love me. Not yet. He didn't pull the words back. But I respect you. And I respect that girl. And I have lived in that house alone for 8 years. And this week, I've understood something. I was wrong when I decided solitude was the best I had left. May was quiet for a while. When she spoke slowly, like she was building something while she said it. If I agree to this, I am not the person being rescued. I am a person entering a decision that affects both of us equally. Equal say, equal standing. The right to leave if this stops being right for Lily or for me. I understand that. I also contribute. I don't take from you. I bring what I have. What do you have? Bookkeeping. Thomas always said your ledgers were a disaster. Cole looked at his hands. Thomas wasn't wrong. And I am going to learn to ride properly and to shoot. I will not depend on another person for my own physical safety. Not ever again. I'll teach you both. May was quiet another moment. Then she said it the way she said everything that mattered. Flat even. Like packed earth. All right, Cole Harlan. But we do this right. The afternoon before they planned to tell Lily, a man came up the track on a bay horse. Settled-looking fellow, good land north of town. Cole knew him vaguely. Name was Wade Porter. Porter said he was interested in Cole's east acreage. Had a cash offer. Fair price. Cole stood at the fence and listened. Porter's eyes moved toward the porch twice while he was talking. May was sitting out there with a cup of coffee. The second time, Porter's eyes went that direction. He adjusted the angle of his hat. It wasn't about the land. It's not for sale, Cole said. Porter rode away. May was already off the porch by the time the bay horse reached the road. She walked out to the fence and stood beside Cole. You know he didn't come about the land. She said, yes, you sent him off. Yes, you didn't ask me first. Cole stopped. He thought about it for a real moment. You're right. I should have. I'm sorry. May looked at him, something measured in her face. That is the first time you have apologized to me. It won't be the last. I accept it. She paused, and you were right to send him away. How do you figure? Because you weren't protecting property, May said. You were protecting a person, and you did it before you had any official reason to. She looked at him steadily. That tells me something about what this arrangement is actually going to be. They told Lily in the morning. Cole spoke plainly. Someone wants to take you from your mama. We're doing everything we can to stop it. One of those things is that your mama and I are going to get married. Not because it isn't real, because that's how the law works, and we need the law on our side. Lily ate her oatmeal. She thought it through. The grandmother from Boston, she said. Yes, I've met her twice. She called me the little one in a way that was not meant kindly. That's why she isn't right for this, May said. Lily looked at her mother. Do you want to do this, Mary Cole? The directness of it stopped both of them completely. May looked at her daughter. I want to be with you. And Cole Harlan is a good man. That is enough to start with. Lily turned to Cole. And you? Yes, why? Because I've been alone too long and I only just understood it. Lily considered this with the serious gravity of a judge accepting evidence. Fine, she said, but I still call you Cole, not anything else. Papa's Papa. I understand that, and Penny is mine. Penny has been yours since the day you named her. The wedding happened 3 days later at the Justice of the Peace in Clearwater. One candle. A man named McNamara, who had married over 200 couples in 20 years and had long since stopped asking anything beyond what the law required. Delray and Ruth Alderman were the witnesses. Lily stood between Cole and May and took both their hands. No one had asked her to. No one had suggested it. She just placed herself there the way she had placed herself on that ridge, between danger and her mother, because it was where she belonged. When McNamara finished the necessary words, Lily asked out loud, Are we a family now? Nobody answered right away. Ruth Alderman, sitting in the witness chair with her good coat on, said, Honey, regardless of what that paper says, you've been a family since the man got off his horse on that flat. Ruth came over the next morning with cornbread and a jar of honey and settled at Cole's kitchen table with May, like two women who had known each other for years. There is an ease that happens sometimes between certain people. It had nothing to do with time. Ruth had been widowed at 43. Typhoid, she had not gone east, had not sold the land, had not looked for a husband to take over. She had learned to run 400 acres herself, starting from almost nothing. And she had been doing it for 15 years. People told me I was out of my mind, Ruth said. She was pouring coffee in someone else's kitchen with no apology for it. They said, Ruth, you can't do this to yourself. This land is too hard for a woman working alone. She set the pot down. 15 years. My land is in better shape now than when Frank was alive. Not because I was better than Frank, because I stopped arguing with myself about the right way and just did it. May looked at her. Something in May's shoulders came down a notch. The first time since she had woken up in this house, that something in her body let go of a little weight. I don't want to be rescued, May said. Cole means well, but I need to be clear about that. You're not being rescued, Ruth said. She said it the way you say something true that doesn't need decoration. You're being grounded. Do you know the difference? Rescued is when someone pulls you up. Grounded is when you have solid enough earth under your feet to stand back up yourself. She looked at May straight. Cole Harlan isn't rescuing you. He's a man with land hard enough to stand on. What you do with your standing is entirely yours. May sat with that for a moment. Then she nodded once, small and definite. 2 days after the wedding, May sat down at Cole's desk and opened his account books. She was in there for 2 hours. When she came out, she found Cole in the south pasture, and she told him plainly that he had been paying 1.5 times market rate for seed and livestock supplements for 4 straight years. I buy from Harrigan's in Clearwater, Cole said. Harrigan's is charging you what they charge because you never negotiate and you never compare. You are the easiest customer they have. I don't have time to, I do. She said it without any edge in it. Just fact. Give me 1 week. I'll find you 2 other suppliers at better rates. Cole studied her. You worked as a bookkeeper. Taught myself. Thomas used to say I was better than any bookkeeper he had ever hired. She paused. I was never paid for it. She said the last part without bitterness. It was simply a fact she was setting down on the table. Cole nodded. Then you'll be paid for it now, in ranch equity, May said. Not wages. If I'm working this land, I want a stake in it, not a paycheck. Cole looked at her for a moment, really looked. This was the moment he understood, fully and completely, who May Calloway was. That's fair, he said. Most afternoons, Cole took May to the south fence line to practice shooting. It had been her condition before she agreed to anything, and she held to it the way she held to everything she said she would do. She was not naturally gifted at it. She didn't have the instinct for it yet, but she had patience, and she had stubbornness. And in Cole's experience, those 2 things got you further than instinct did. One afternoon, he adjusted her stance, his hand on her right shoulder for less than a second, moving the angle back a fraction. He stepped away the moment the correction was made. May fired, hit the mark. Neither of them said anything about that second his hand had been there. Walking back to the house, there was a different quality to the silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't what it had been before either. It was something without a name yet, but it was taking up real space. Delray brought news that same week. One Ryder man had been caught in Billings and was talking. Cal Ryder, the leader, was still running. Last seen heading toward Clearwater. And the man in custody had confirmed something important. The Ryder gang had received information about the Calloway family's route from someone back east. Someone who knew exactly which road, exactly which day, exactly what the family was carrying. Someone back east, Cole said, still being traced. Tate will know more when he gets here. After Delray left, Cole and May stood at the kitchen table looking at each other. Augusta, May said, not an accusation. She said it, the way you say something, when the numbers have finally added up. She knew our route. She wrote to Ashworth to stop us from going further west and force Thomas back to negotiate. Ashworth found Ryder because Ryder was available and cheap. She stopped. He didn't mean for Thomas to die, Cole said quietly. No, May said, but he built the machine that did it. That evening, May was cleaning up after supper when she found the branch in its place by the spare room door. It had been there since the first night. Nobody had moved it. Nobody had spoken about it much. She picked it up carefully. She carried it outside to the corner of the yard she had been clearing by hand. The old kitchen garden Cole had let go to seed. She pushed the bottom of the branch down into the soil, just deep enough to stand on its own, not planting it, not throwing it away, just letting it stand. She went back inside without explaining it to anyone. The next morning, Lily came through the back door, and her hand reached out as she passed the branch and touched the top of it with 2 fingers. Just once, almost without thinking. She did it the morning after that, and the morning after that. Nobody mentioned it. It became part of the house. After Lily was asleep that night, Cole and May sat at the kitchen table with coffee. Neither of them was really drinking. No agenda. No problem that needed solving right now. Just 2 people in the quiet. May asked about Clara's name on the land registration. Still there, Cole said. You didn't change it? No, he was quiet a moment. I wasn't ready. May nodded. She didn't push at it. She just said, you don't have to be ready on any particular schedule. And then she rinsed both cups and went to bed. Cole sat alone in his kitchen. The silence was not heavy tonight, just quiet. He had forgotten there was a difference. Augusta Hargrove came to the Clearwater churchyard the evening before she came to the ranch. She dismissed the driver at the gate and walked in alone. The yard was small and new, the way everything in Montana was new. Thomas Calloway's marker was temporary, wood and hand-lettered, the best that could be done in the time available. Augusta stood in front of it for a long time. She was a woman who had one face. She had maintained it for so long, through so many things, that the public version and the private version had grown together into the same thing. She could not have separated them now if she tried. Control was how she had survived her husband's death 20 years ago. Control was how she had run the company he left her. Control was how she had loved Thomas, managing his life and his future and his choices the way you manage an estate. And she knew, standing in this Montana churchyard with no one watching, that Thomas had known it too. He had left Boston because of it. He had married May because of it. She did not cry. Augusta Hargrove had not cried since the day they buried her husband, and she did not cry now. But she knelt, not from weakness, because this was the only moment in this entire journey when she did not have to be the person she had spent 40 years becoming. She put her hand flat on the turned earth. She said nothing. Nobody heard. Nobody saw. She got back up, walked back to the gate, got in the carriage. In the morning, she came to the ranch. She arrived in the finest carriage available in Montana, which was already a statement about how she saw the situation. She was dressed in navy, not morning black, the color of someone who had already decided how this would end. 2 Pinkerton men rode alongside, not for her protection, for information. Ashworth walked at her side. Cole saw them from the porch and went inside. May, she's here. May set down her pen. She was working the accounts. She took one slow breath, the kind that isn't about calming down, but about getting ready. She stood up all right, she said. They met in the front yard. Lily came out and stood behind May with her hand in her mother's. Augusta looked at Lily for the first time in 3 years. What happened in her eyes was not warmth. Cole watched it carefully. It was assessment, the movement of someone cataloging what she sees, taking inventory, how the child stands, whether she carries herself the right way, whether she is what Augusta needs her to be. But underneath that, there was something else, something that had nothing to do with inventory. Lily was the last living piece of Thomas. Augusta could see it. The grief and the calculation happened in the same instant, and Cole watched both. I didn't come here to make war, Augusta said. She said it to May. You came with 2 Pinkerton agents and 3 lawyers, May said. I'd be curious how you define the word. A short silence. Augusta turned to Cole. Mr. Harlan, I understand how this looks. A wealthy woman trying to separate a child from her mother. But I want you to understand my position. What do you want me to understand? Cole said it quietly. No heat in it, but nothing soft either. Because here is what I understand. I found a 6-year-old standing between wild animals and her unconscious mother with a broken stick, 2 days alone in July heat. I understand something about that child. I understand something about that mother. He looked at Augusta steadily. Where were you when that was happening? Augusta didn't answer. I won't respond to that, she said finally. You don't have to, Cole said. The answer is already here. Cole did not invite Augusta inside the house. He brought 2 chairs to the porch. Not rudeness, a line drawn clearly. Augusta tried the straightforward approach. First, Mr. Harlan, your ranch has significant financial difficulties. I've had a thorough accounting done. You had the Pinkertons look at my books, Cole said. She didn't deny it. She laid out the offer. Every debt cleared. Land expanded. Capital to start over completely. In exchange, he would end the marriage and step back from the guardianship proceeding. No, Cole said. You haven't heard the full terms. I don't need to. He looked at her directly. You are asking me to sell a person, not land, a person. The answer is no at any number. Augusta's voice shifted. Something in it came down a register, moved toward something more human. Thomas was my son. He's dead. Lily is everything that remains of him. I only want, what do you want? Cole asked it genuinely, not as a challenge. He actually wanted to know, do you want Lily? Or do you want Thomas back through Lily? Because those are 2 different things. And that child will feel the difference every single day of her life if you raise her. Augusta didn't answer right away. Cole went on quieter. Thomas chose to leave Boston. That wasn't a betrayal. That was him becoming who he needed to be. Lily is growing up with the same capacity. You can give her Boston, you can give her schools and money, and a house with 15 rooms. But you cannot give her the right to choose who she becomes, because you already took that from Thomas. And I think some part of you knows that. The sentence landed. Augusta stood up. I'll see you in court, Mr. Harlan. I'll be there, Cole said. Before the carriage pulled away, Lily appeared at the top of the porch steps. Augusta saw her. Lily saw Augusta. 2 people looking at each other. One 6 years old, one 62. Neither of them performing anything. You're my grandmother, Lily said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, I've only met you twice. I know. You didn't visit much. Augusta did not say what was true, which was that Thomas had not wanted her there, that their family had become a place where every visit was a battle over something. She just said, no, I didn't. Do you know what Papa liked? Lily asked, straight out. No preamble. Augusta paused. Horses, she said slowly, when he was small. He was terrified of them until he was 7 years old. Then he decided he wasn't going to be afraid anymore. He learned to ride in one summer. Lily looked at her. Something changed in Lily's face. The evaluating look, the measuring look that Lily turned on most things, went quiet. What replaced it was something simpler. Interest. Real interest. I was afraid of horses, too, Lily said. I decided not to be. Augusta was quiet for a moment. Like your father, she said. And her voice, for the first time since she had arrived, was not the voice of a woman who had already decided the outcome. Lily nodded once. Then she turned and went back inside. Augusta stood looking at the closed door for a long moment before she climbed into the carriage. Ruth came by that evening with a warning. The Pinkerton men had been through Clearwater asking questions. Who had witnessed the wedding? Whether it had seemed like a real ceremony. How Cole Harlan had lived before May arrived. They're building the fraud argument, Ruth said. And Cole, they found something in your history. The Clearwater record has the arrest file from 1872. Cole nodded. He had known it was there. May stepped onto the porch. She had heard Ruth from inside. What happened in 1872? She asked. Tate and I were arrested for public disorder, Cole said. We stepped in when a group of rail workers were beating a Chinese laborer off a construction site. They wanted him gone because of who he was. We spent one night in jail. May looked at him. You were arrested for stopping a beating. That's what happened. They'll use it to say you're violent and unstable, Ruth said. I know. May was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that arrest is going to be our strongest piece of evidence. Cole looked at her. Because it shows that 12 years ago you were willing to pay a personal price to defend someone the people around you had decided wasn't worth defending. May said, that's not instability. That's character. And the same man who did that is the same man who sat down on the ground to be at a frightened child's eye level. She paused. People don't change that much, not in the ways that count. Late that night, after Ruth had gone and Lily was asleep, a folded piece of paper appeared under the front door. Cole picked it up. Read it. Get out. Take the kid. This is your only warning. Cedar. He stood in the kitchen holding it for a moment. Cal Ryder knew exactly where they were. R.J. Tate arrived on the last train. Cole heard the horse at the gate before dawn and was already at the door when Tate came up the track. 12 years had filled him out and steadied him, put a federal badge on his chest, and a particular kind of patience in his eyes. The patience of a man who had seen enough to stop being surprised by things. They sat at the kitchen table. Cole, May, Delray, and Tate. The note from Ryder sat in the middle where everyone could see it. Tate laid out what he had. 3 Ryder men in custody, 1 dead in the arrest. Cal Ryder himself still running. Last confirmed heading toward this part of Montana. Then Tate put a transcribed statement on the table. One of the men in custody has confirmed the gang received information about the Calloway family's route through an intermediary, he said. That intermediary made contact through a Boston law office. The kitchen went quiet. Ashworth's office, May said. Not a question. We don't have a direct line to Augusta Hargrove herself, Tate said carefully. What we know is that Augusta wrote to Ashworth, instructing him to stop the Calloway family from going further west and force Thomas back to Boston to negotiate. Ashworth found Ryder. He'd used men like Ryder before for pressure work. He didn't anticipate murder. Tate paused, but he built the machine that produced it. Nobody spoke for a moment. Augusta didn't order Thomas killed, May said quietly. She started the engine. She said it flat and clear, the way May said everything that was true and painful. Like she had already done the work of accepting it, and now she was just reporting the fact. After the meeting, Cole went outside. He stood in the yard, looking south. May came out and stood a few feet behind him. You want to go after him, she said. Ryder knows this property. He knows where Lily sleeps. Tate can handle. This is the man who killed Thomas, Cole said. He is threatening my family. May was quiet for a moment. You want to kill him, she said. Cole didn't answer right away. I want it finished, he said. Those aren't the same thing. No, May agreed, they're not. She looked south, the same direction he was looking. If you go after him, who stays here? Tate. Delray, and if Ryder isn't where you think he is. If he's been watching long enough to know when you leave, he sends that note the night before the trial. Cole. He's not just threatening. He's timing it. Cole stood with that. This was why he needed May. Not just because something had been building between them for weeks, because she saw the angles that his anger was blocking. He thought it through. He said, not a chase. We let him come to us. Yes, May said. They planned it together at the kitchen table. The 4 of them, Tate would make a visible show of leaving in the afternoon, taking 2 horses out the south gate, making the ranch look less defended. Delray would position himself in the barn before dark. Cole would be in the house. May and Lily in the back room with the door locked and the window covered. Before dark, May told Lily what might happen that night. She did not soften it or hide it. Lily was not a child who was helped by being kept away from the truth. The truth had found her anyway, on that ridge, and she had handled it with more steadiness than most grown people could have managed. The man who killed your father may come to this property tonight, May said. We are ready for him. Lily was quiet for a moment. What can I do? She asked. Stay in the back room. 3 knocks means me or Cole. Anything else? You don't open that door. 3 knocks, Lily said. 3 knocks. Lily went to the back room and set herself in the chair by the window. She did not plan to sleep. Ryder came at 2 in the morning. Not alone. 2 men with him. They went to the barn first. That was their mistake. Delray was in the barn. 1 shot fired high. Warning. The 2 men ran, and Tate caught them at the south fence. Then Cal Ryder came toward the house. Lily heard the barn shot. She climbed up on the chest beneath the window and looked out through the gap at the top. The yard was full of moonlight. Every shadow ran long and sharp. She could see everything clearly. Ryder was crossing the yard toward the front door, and Cole stepped out, not running, walking. the measured walk of a man who had already decided exactly what he was going to do. He stood between Ryder and the house. Lily watched. She couldn't hear every word. She heard the shape of it. Ryder said something. Cole answered. Ryder's hand moved toward his gun and stopped, because Tate was coming around the left side of the house, and Delray was coming from the right. And Cal Ryder was a man who knew how to read arithmetic when it was set out plainly in front of him. Cole stepped to the side. Tate put on the handcuffs. Lily watched Cole hand over the man who had killed her father. Watched him do it without raising his own gun. Watched him keep the promise he had made in the barn that night about what justice was and what it wasn't. In the one moment when keeping that promise cost something real. She climbed down from the chest, went back to the chair, closed her eyes. She added the last entry to the ledger she had been keeping in her head since the ridge. 3 knocks at the back room door. Lily opened it. She came through and saw Ryder in the yard, his hands behind his back. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Cole. "You didn't shoot him," she said. "No, why?" Cole crouched down so he was level with her. He had done that the first day on the ridge without thinking about it. He did it now the same way. "Because you were watching," he said. "And because I want you to grow up knowing that justice is not the same thing as killing. Justice is making sure the people who cause harm face what they've done the right way. Through the law." He held her gaze. "Killing him would have been for me. Doing it this way is for something bigger than me." Lily looked past him at Ryder for a moment, then back at Cole. "Will he go to prison?" "He'll stand trial," Tate said. "And the evidence is solid." Lily nodded once, went back inside. In the morning, Tate laid out what Ryder had confirmed overnight. The intermediary was a clerk inside Ashworth's office. He had sold the route information for cash, not under Augusta's direct instruction. But Ashworth had known within days of Thomas's death. He had buried it. "Augusta's position is this," Tate said. "She didn't order it. Her lawyer's office produced it. She bears indirect responsibility because she controls everything Ashworth does. And she chose not to ask hard questions about how he was handling her instructions." May's hands were flat on the table. "What does that mean for the custody hearing? Her fitness to raise a child, her judgment, her oversight?" Tate looked at both of them. "I think it means considerably more than nothing." That night late, Cole sat on the porch. The cold wind that had been coming all week was finally here, moving across the flat land from the north, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. May came out and sat beside him. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Not of the courtroom." "What then?" Cole looked at the dark land. "That if we lose, there's nothing left I can do." And I told her I would. May was quiet for a while. "We won't lose," she said. "You don't know that. I know we have done everything right." She looked at him. "And sometimes that isn't enough. But even when it isn't, what we did is still real. No ruling changes what happened on that ridge. No ruling changes who you are or who she is." Cole looked at her for a moment that was slightly too long. She held it for a moment that was also slightly too long. Then she looked back at the dark. Neither of them said anything else. The reader knows. Word had traveled through Clearwater the way word travels through small towns, which is fast and without asking permission. The back rows of the courthouse were full by the time Cole and May arrived. Ruth Alderman in her good coat, 3 neighboring ranchers who owed Cole nothing except the memory of a man who had shown up when they needed someone to show up. Pastor Webb from the Methodist congregation, who had received a wagon of winter supplies from Cole 3 years running, without being asked, and without Cole mentioning it afterward. A schoolteacher, a blacksmith's wife, people who knew Cole Harlan not because he had ever asked anything of them, because small communities remember who shows up and who doesn't. Augusta's team occupied the left table entirely, Ashworth and 2 other attorneys. A stack of documents that reached above Lily's head. The posture of people who had already written the outcome in their heads. Cole, May and their lawyer, James Whitaker, sat at the right table. Whitaker had 1 folder. Lily sat in the chair, against the wall, with her hands folded in her lap. She was still as a photograph. She had been that way since they walked in. Judge Elias Cormack entered, gray-bearded, unhurried, 15 years on this bench. The particular patience of a man who had heard every version of every argument and was still, somehow, listening for something true. Ashworth opened with the measured confidence of a man who had never lost a case he expected to win. He built the argument methodically. May's lack of property, no fixed address, no income, recent serious trauma, health still not fully restored. A widowed mother, without means, could not provide what this child required. Boston had school society, a future. The frontier had hardship and uncertainty. And the marriage, he said, had been entered into 11 days after meeting, 3 days after the legal petition had been filed. Fraud by timing, if nothing else. His witness was a local merchant who confirmed Cole had never brought a woman to Clearwater in 8 years. The marriage was convenient. The marriage was constructed. Whitaker cross-examined. In 8 years of knowing Cole Harlan, have you ever had reason to doubt his character? No. Has he failed to honor a debt? Never. Behaved dishonestly in any dealing you know of? No. Been unkind to a woman or a child in your presence? No. Whitaker let that sit for a moment. So what you're testifying is that a man you've found consistently honest for 8 years did something that surprised you. That's right. Thank you. Delray was first on the stand for their side. 10 years, 2 sentences. I have ridden with Cole Harlan in situations where I needed to know exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. There is no woman or child in Montana. I would more confidently leave in his care. Ashworth tried to shake Delray in the cross-examination. He discovered that Hank Delray did not shake. Tate came next. He told the 1,872 story plainly, without any performance around it. Cole Harlan was arrested for stepping in when a group of men were beating a Chinese rail worker off a construction site. The man had done nothing except be who he was, and they wanted him gone for it. Cole was the only man who stopped. That is the only incident of public violence on his record that I am aware of. Ashworth tried your personal debt to Mr. Hart. Doesn't that compromise your objectivity? Tate looked at him steadily. I am a deputy federal marshal appointed by the United States Department of Justice. I have sworn an oath to truth before the law. If you have evidence I've lied today, please present it. Ashworth sat down. Ruth Alderman came to the stand like she went everywhere, without hurry and without apology. I've lived beside Cole Harlan for 6 years, she said. I've watched how he treats people when he doesn't know anyone is watching. That is how I judge a person, not when they know they're being evaluated. She paused. That ranch has been dying slowly for 8 years from lack of hands and lack of reason. It's coming back to life, not because of money, because there are people in it now who know why it's worth saving. May took the stand. She told the story without decoration and without asking for anything. The attack on the road, Thomas dead, Lily standing guard with a broken branch for 2 days, Cole appearing on the ridge. Ashworth came at her directly. You agreed to marry this man 11 days after meeting him, specifically to create a legal advantage. I agreed to marry him 11 days after meeting him, May said, because I had watched him carefully for 11 days. I am a good judge of people. I have survived by being a good judge of people. You cannot love someone in 11 days. I didn't say I loved him. I said I respected him. Love takes time. Respect takes evidence. I had evidence. She looked at Ashworth evenly. Would you like to hear it? She listed it. No drama in it. Just the facts in the order they had happened. The branch moved without a word, to where Lily could reach it. The water, given to Lily with a reason instead of a command. The key handed to a 6-year-old girl because she had the right to control her own safety. The ranch accounts, shared as equals from the first week. And Cal Ryder, not shot when there was every legal and personal reason to do so. He did all of those things without being asked, May said, without an audience, without any legal reason to. That is the man I chose for my daughter to grow up beside. At the midday recess, a wire came for Tate. Ryder had escaped during transfer, last seen heading toward Clearwater. The ranch was empty. Ruth had come to the courthouse with the others. Tate looked at Cole. Cole looked at May. Go, May said before he could speak. I'll send Ruth back now. I can handle what is in that room. May go. 1 second passed between them. Cole nodded, moved. He was out the door and on his horse at a run. May walked back into the courtroom alone. Cormac looked over the rims of his glasses when the afternoon session opened. "Miss Calloway," he said, "would you come up here, please?" Ashworth was already on his feet. "Your Honor, the child has not been submitted as a witness, and she is under the age. I am not taking sworn testimony." "Counselor," Cormac said it without raising his voice, "I want to speak with the person this proceeding most directly concerns." "Sit down." Ashworth sat. Lily walked to the front of the courtroom, straight back, hands at her sides. She looked up at Cormac without any flinching in it. "What is your name?" "Lily May Calloway. 6 years and 7 months. Do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes. My grandmother wants to take me to Boston. My mama and Cole want to stop her. You decide. And what do you want?" "To stay with my mama." "Why?" "Because she is my mama." She said it, the way you say something that has no further explanation required. "And Mr. Harlan?" Lily was quiet for a moment. "Cole is the person I chose to be near," she said. "That's different from Mama. Mama I don't choose. She's just Mama always. Cole I watched for 3 weeks, and then I decided." "What did you base that on?" "He tells me true things, even when they're hard to hear. He doesn't promise what he isn't sure he can deliver. And he didn't shoot the man who killed my father." She paused. "Because he said that's not what justice is." The courtroom was absolutely still. Cormac looked across the room. "Is there anything you'd like to say to your grandmother?" "Lily." Lily turned and looked directly at Augusta. "You can write to me," she said, "if you want to know me. I'll write back if the letters aren't sad." Augusta Hargrove, who had not shifted her posture once in this proceeding, could not answer. Her lips pressed together. Her eyes did not fill, but they came very close. Cole came through the courthouse doors as the afternoon session was drawing toward its end. Ryder was delivered. Tate and Delray had him. Cole was at a near run through the hall and into the back of the courtroom in time to see Ashworth make one final move. "Mr. Harlan, if this court awards custody to your wife today, and if your marriage subsequently dissolves, what guarantees this child's stability? Would you be willing to sign this ranch over as a financial guarantee for the child? To prove your commitment here is genuine rather than strategic. A trap with teeth on both sides." Cole stood up. He didn't look at Whitaker. "Didn't look at May, yes," he said. "One word." The room stopped moving. "This land was my father's. He lost it once and fought for 10 years to get it back. I do not offer it lightly." He paused, "But I know this. A child who stood between wild animals and her unconscious mother for 2 days with a broken stick is worth more than any land I own. If the court needs my signature to believe that, I'll sign." Cormac looked at Cole for a long moment, then at Ashworth. "That won't be necessary," he said. They waited in the hallway for 40 minutes. Cole standing, May sitting with Lily in her lap, Whitaker reading his one folder for what was probably the 8th time. Augusta across the hall, with her lawyers around her. The doors opened. Cormac read the ruling standing. "This court has reviewed this petition with care. It acknowledges the resources the petitioner can provide. It acknowledges the following as well." He paused and looked at the room. "The law of this territory and this nation cannot and does not recognize money as the sole measure of love or of fitness to raise a child." He looked at Lily. Lily May Calloway, 6 years old, stood guard over her unconscious mother for 2 days in conditions that would have broken most adults. She did it without instruction, without promise of reward, without certainty that it would matter. She did it because it was what love required. He looked up at the room. "I will ask anyone here to tell me the child does not know what love is and what it costs." He set down the paper. "The court further notes that information leading to the death of Thomas Calloway originated from within the legal office, representing the petitioner. This does not constitute criminal liability. It does constitute a serious and unresolved question about judgment and oversight, and the capacity to create safety for a child." He picked up the gavel. "The petition is denied. Guardianship remains with the child's mother. Court is adjourned." In the hallway afterward, Augusta stood alone. Her lawyers were gathering their papers. The carriage was outside waiting. May walked past. May stopped, turned slowly. "I didn't know what Ashworth had done," Augusta said. The armor was gone from her voice. Just the voice. With the information about your route, I want you to know I didn't know he would take it that far. May held her gaze for a long moment. I'll think about what that's worth, she said. The child, her name is Lily, May said. Quiet and clear and without any cruelty in it. She told you what she needs from you. The rest is your decision. May walked out into the afternoon light. Augusta stood in the empty hallway. She had everything the Hargrove name had built across 3 generations. She had never been less certain of anything in her life. 3 horses heading north in the late afternoon light. Montana at that hour does something particular. The sky goes bigger than you remember it being. The land goes gold. The shadows run so long they seem to be reaching for something past the horizon that they'll never quite get to. Lily fell asleep against May's shoulder before they cleared the edge of Clearwater, the same way she always went, from complete alertness to complete unconsciousness in seconds. The decisive drop of someone who has finished what needed doing and is now allowing herself to stop. May and Cole rode side by side. Neither of them spoke for a while. You were going to sign the land. May said, yes, that land was your father's. I know what it is. Why? Cole thought about how to answer that honestly. May had a way of asking questions that made dishonest answers feel beside the point. I spent 8 years holding on to that ranch like it was the last piece of me that was still standing, he said. This week I understood something. Land is land. What I've been protecting these past few weeks is worth considerably more. May was quiet for a moment. Cole, yeah, I don't want this to be only on paper. She said it the way she said everything that mattered. Flat. Direct. No softness around it to make it easier to take back. Cole looked over at her. It hasn't been only on paper, he said, since the day she named my horse. May looked at the road ahead. The corner of her mouth lifted. Just slightly, just enough. Lily woke the moment the horses stopped at home. She dropped before anyone could reach for her, both feet hitting the dirt at the same time. And she ran straight for the barn without breaking stride. Penny. We're back. We won. The judge said I stay with Mama. And Cole gave that bad man to the marshal because he said that's what real justice looks like. Do you think he was right? I think he was right, Penny. I was watching from the window, and I saw the whole thing, and Cole and May stood in the yard, listening to her voice carry through the barn walls. She'll be in there an hour, Cole said. Penny will listen. May said, Penny doesn't have a choice. Nobody in this yard has a choice when Lily decides to talk. They laughed, together, unrehearsed, for the first time in that long day. It surprised both of them a little. 3 weeks after the verdict, May was on the south fence line working on her shooting in the late afternoon light. She had stuck to it every day she could. Cole taught her without making the teaching feel like teaching, which was the best kind. She was not naturally gifted at it. But she was patient, and she was stubborn, and those 2 things together, over enough days, end up looking a lot like skill. She fired 3 rounds, hit the mark on all 3. She didn't celebrate. She just looked at the target for a moment, with the expression of someone taking an honest measurement. Thomas would have laughed at how long this took me, she said. He'd have been proud. Cole said, yes, May said. He would have. 3 weeks after the verdict, a letter arrived from Boston. The handwriting on the envelope was not a secretary's hand. May set it on the kitchen table and called Lily in. Letter from your grandmother, she said. Lily looked at it. Looked at May. Do I have to read it? You choose. Lily stood at the table, looking at the envelope for a moment. Then she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a small card and a pressed flower. A violet from Boston. Someone had written in pencil alongside it. Thomas liked these when he was small. The card read, Lily, I am sorry I did not come sooner. Before all of this happened, I am sorry for how I came when I did. If you would like to write to me, I would be very glad to hear from you. Your grandmother, Augusta Hargrove. Lily read it twice. She set it down on the table. She said she was sorry, Lily said. Yes, May said. Is she actually sorry, or is she just writing it? May looked at her daughter directly. That is exactly the right question, she said. And you are the only person who can answer it. Over time. Lily looked at the card for a long moment. I want to write back, she said. All right, but I don't know what to say. You could start with something you know about your father that she might not, Cole said from the kitchen table. He was pretending to read the accounts. He had been pretending to read the accounts for about 10 minutes. Lily looked at him. Can I tell her about Penny? I can't think of a reason not to. That night, after Lily was asleep, Cole went to the bedroom. He opened the bottom drawer of the small dresser. There was a framed photograph in there. He had put it face down 8 years ago and had not touched it since. Clara, he held it and looked at it for a while. Then he carried it out to the main room and hung it on the wall between the two windows where the morning light came in. May was in the doorway when he turned. Clara, he said, just her name. I know, May said, you told me. I didn't tell you all of it. You don't have to tell it all at once. Cole looked at the photograph. I thought keeping her in that drawer was how I honored her, he said. But I was just keeping myself in there with her. May came into the room and stood beside him, both of them looking at the photograph. She looks kind, May said after a moment. She was the kindest person I ever knew. He paused until he stopped. May didn't fill the space. She understood it. Kolya, I don't need you to love me the way you loved her. I need you to love me the way you love May Calloway. Those are two different women. Yes, and both of them deserve to be loved as themselves. Not as a replacement, not as a shadow, as who they actually are. Cole looked at her for a moment. When did you get this wise? Around age 12, May said. I just don't usually say it out loud. Before Lily woke the next morning, Cole took the land registration from the filing drawer. He set it on the kitchen table. He placed a pen beside it and a blank amendment form beside the pen. Then he went out to the barn. May came through the kitchen a little later and found it. She stood at the table looking at it for a moment. She understood what he had done. He had left it for her to decide. Not left it for her to sign because he had decided. Left it because the decision was hers. She sat down, she picked up the pen. Lily came in from the back porch at a run. Mama, what are you doing? Completing some paperwork. What kind of paperwork? The kind that makes something official. Lily looked at the documents, looked at her mother, looked out the door in the direction of the barn. She ran back outside Cole. Mama is putting her name on the land. Cole's voice came back from inside the barn. I know. Aren't you coming to look? She doesn't need me to look. I trust her to know what she's doing. Lily stood in the yard processing this for a moment. Then she went back inside. She sat down across the table from May and watched her write. Is this our home now? Lily asked. May set the pen down. It always was, she said. Now it's just on paper, too. The next morning, 3 people at the table. The Montana morning light came in low and gold through the kitchen window, the kind that makes everything look like it has been exactly this way for 100 years. Lily was arguing that cornbread should have honey in the batter. May was explaining that cornbread is cornbread and does not require improvement. Cole was eating and staying out of it. Cole, Lily said, which side are you on? The side that doesn't get food thrown at it. That's not a side. It's the wisest side available. May looked at him across the table. Part judgment. Part something that still didn't have a name, but was taking up real space now. Both of them could feel it. Honey ruins cornbread, May told Lily. Honey improves everything, Lily said. Not everything. What about names? Does honey make names better? Nobody puts honey in names. That's why Lily sounds better than vinegar. Both adults looked at the child. What kind of argument is that? May asked. I'm not entirely sure, Lily said pleasantly. But I think I'm winning. Cole looked out the window at his ranch in the morning light, all the long days ahead of it, all the seasons that had been waiting. 4 rooms, a solid roof, level floors, a well that never ran dry. Nothing about it had changed since the morning he rode east to check a fence and heard something that reached inside his chest before his brain had time to argue about it. But it was alive now, every corner of it. My father used to say a man's worth isn't in what he builds or what he survives. It's in what he moves toward. I spent 8 years moving backward. Not from cowardice. I just forgot there was another direction. I got so used to the weight of all that empty space that I stopped noticing it was grief. I thought it was just the way things were. Then I heard a sound on a flat Montana plain, a child's voice, furious and refusing to stop, and I pulled the left rein. That was all I did. But sometimes the simplest thing you do is the truest thing about you. Sometimes it's enough to stop, to get off the horse, to hold up both hands and say, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and mean every word of it. That was all. And it was enough. And it was everything. When a story like this comes to its end, it is easy to believe that what we have witnessed is simply a tale of survival, justice, or law being restored in a harsh and unforgiving land. But the truth of it runs deeper than that. What happened on Cole Harlan-S land was never just about Ryder, or Augusta Hargrove, or even the courtroom where everything finally came into the light. It was about what kind of people we become when life strips away comfort, certainty, and the illusion that we are in control. Because the West has always been like that. It does not ask who you used to be. It only asks what you will do when no one is watching, when there is no safety net, and when every decision carries weight that cannot be undone. And in that silence, character reveals itself not in speeches, not in promises, but in action. Cole Harlan did not set out to be a man anyone would call righteous. He was simply a man who had learned, through loss and isolation, that silence can become its own kind of surrender. For 8 years, he lived with the kind of grief that does not announce itself loudly. It settles in the walls of a house, in the empty chair at the table, in the spaces where laughter used to exist. And when he met Lily and May, he did not suddenly become someone else. He simply stopped agreeing with the idea that distance and solitude were the only ways to survive pain. May Calloway, in her own way, carried a different kind of strength. Not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that observes, evaluates, and endures. She did not trust easily, and she did not mistake survival for safety. She understood something very important about the world, that systems do not always protect people, and sometimes they even disguise harm as order. But she also understood that clarity, seeing things exactly as they are, is the beginning of every form of real protection. And then there was Lily, a child who should have been defined by fear, but instead became defined by decision. Standing between danger and her mother with nothing but a broken branch was not just an act of survival. It was an act of love in its purest form, love that does not wait for instruction, does not require permission, and does not measure risk before acting. She did not learn courage from books or adults. She simply became it when the world gave her no other choice. Together, these 3 lives formed something that the outside world often misunderstands. Not a perfect family, not a planned arrangement, but a structure built from necessity, recognition, and slowly earned trust. And in that structure, we see one of the most important truths this story leaves behind. People are not defined by how they begin, but by what they choose to protect when everything is at stake. The arrival of Augusta Hargrove reminds us that control, even when it is dressed as care, can become a form of blindness. She believed she was acting for legacy, for family, for what remained of her son. But in doing so, she almost lost sight of the living person in front of her. The story does not make her a villain. It makes her human. A woman shaped by power, grief, and the belief that love can be managed like an asset. But love cannot be managed. It can only be given or withheld. And the difference between the two changes everything. And then there is the law, the courtroom, the arguments, the papers, the final decision. It would be easy to say that justice arrived because the ruling favored the right people. But that would be too simple. The deeper truth is that justice here was not a single moment. It was a chain of actions long before the courtroom ever existed. It was Cole choosing not to pass by on the ridge. It was May choosing to observe before she trusted. It was Lily choosing truth over fear. And it was a community choosing to testify not for reward, but because they knew what kind of man they had seen. In the end, what this story teaches is not that good always wins easily. It does not. It is that goodness, when it appears, is rarely loud. It does not announce itself. it does not guarantee safety. It simply shows up consistently in small decisions that accumulate over time until they become something undeniable. The characters, settings, and events portrayed in this story are entirely fictional. While certain themes may echo real-life experiences, they are shaped by creative interpretation.